Hey everyone, today I am starting a new sermon series called What God Does, which isn't the most catchy title, but I couldn't think of a better one. But basically we're going to be looking at different stories of people giving testimony in the Bible. And alongside that we're going to make space, we're going to encourage people to also give their own testimonies, their own stories of what God has done. I don't know we're very good at sharing testimony. Very good at telling our stories of Jesus and what he's done in our lives. I think we're not quick to do that. We're not good at doing that. And yet we should do, because when we do that, it stirs faith and encourages one another. It gives glory to God. And it stirs our expectation, I think, for what's coming. Like when we tell the stories of what God has done in our lives, what Jesus has done in our lives, I think it helps us because we remember what he's done before. And then it stirs faith for what we can still expect him to do in the future. And it tells other people how awesome Jesus is. And so we're going to really, between now and Easter, take some time to really try and push into that. Have loads of opportunity to do that. Let me say to you, there is no such thing as a testimony that's too small. So I think sometimes we can think, well, our story doesn't really count, it's just little. No. There's no such thing as a testimony that is too small. And so big or small, if Jesus has done something in your life, testify to it and tell other people and give God the glory. Now today we're going to be starting by briefly looking at the story of how God instructs Joshua to testify in Joshua chapter 4. But before I read that, I just want to give you some context. Where we pick up the story, the nation of Israel is about to enter the promised land. But they've been in the wilderness for 40 years. So 40 years previously, God had miraculously freed them from slavery in Egypt. He'd parted the Red Sea and they crossed over. And then they were supposed to take a short journey, maybe a matter of weeks, to come to the promised land and enter the promised land. But we read, if you read the story, that the people refused to go into the promised land because there were giants in the land and they were scared and thought, we can't do it. And so an entire generation ends up living in the wilderness, in the desert, for 40 years until it dies out. So it's a lost generation. And so when we pick up the story today, that generation has all died off, apart from Joshua and Caleb, who were the two faithful people. And so we have a new generation standing at the edge of the River Jordan, and the promised land is on the other side. And God has said now to Joshua, right, now is the time to enter the promised land. And so they're standing at the edge of the River Jordan, and the River Jordan's a big river, but it says actually that it's in flood. So think of a river that's maybe 2 or 3 times bigger and wider than it would normally be, maybe running a lot faster than it normally run. That's the river they have to cross to get into the promised land. And so God instructs Joshua to give instruction, and Joshua tells the priests, the people who carry the Ark of the Covenant with them. The Ark of the Covenant is kind of like this fancy box that they carry on poles that kind of contains the presence of God with them. And it's very holy. I mean, you don't touch it, you don't mess with it. It's very holy, so that's why they carry it on sticks, so they're not touching it. And he instructs them to put their feet into the water. And as soon as they put their feet into the water, carrying the ark on their shoulders, it says the river stopped. Now I don't know if you can imagine what this might look like. I mean, it's just crazy to imagine it. So they put their feet into the water, and so the water that flows over their feet flows off downstream, but the water that's coming stops and backs up. I mean, maybe they can see it, maybe they can't, but suddenly the water's no longer coming, and maybe they can see this wall of water held, or maybe just stops upstream and they can't see what's happened. But either way, the water stops, and the nation is able to cross over finally into the promised land, fulfilling the promises of God. This is an awesome promise fulfilling moment. And so then we pick up the story in Joshua chapter 4, and it starts like this. It says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, 1 for each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So Joshua's been told by God, take 12 people, one from each tribe, send them out into the middle of the Jordan where it's dry ground at the minute, pick up some rocks on their shoulders and bring them out, and then build a memorial to me to remind people who I am and what I've done. So then we'll continue in verse 19. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God." Okay, so they go from crossing over. I guess they cross over, and as the priests step out of the water out of the dry riverbed, the water then comes rushing back, and then they move from the shore of the Jordan to a place called Gilgal where they camp, and they build this stone memorial out of the 12 stones that they have got. And it's a memorial that's there for people to look at and to remember and to tell their stories of what God did. When you see the stones, this stone, remember how God stopped the river. Remember how God was faithful to his promise. Remember how he brought a nation out of Egypt and then out of the wilderness. Remember how God was powerful, how he stopped a river in its tracks so that people could cross over. Remember and give thanks and be stirred with hope for the future. Stop and remember. Look at these stones and call to mind what God has done. You know, one of my favourite passages in the Bible is in the book of Lamentations. And the book of Lamentations is 5 chapters of complete misery, of doom, of disaster, of misery, of terrible things happening. Okay, it's a book of lamenting. It's not a happy book. And yet, halfway through chapter 3, right in the middle, in Lamentations 3 verse 21, it says this, "And yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning." It's right there in the middle of this book of misery, of doom, of gloom, of disaster. And then this verse comes, "And yet this I call to mind, therefore I have hope. This I remember, and therefore I have hope." So the writer of Lamentations is just writing this misery, and then he recalls, "But then I remember who God is, and I have hope." It's the same way when they set up the stone memorial. When you walk past it, when you look at it, "Oh, and this I remember. I remember what God did. I remember the things he's done. I remember the stories that people have told. And therefore I have hope." And you might want to take a moment just to stop and answer, just to maybe pause this video and just answer, and just maybe write a list of things that you need to remember. What do you need to remember about God? What do you need to remember about what he has done in your life? What do you need to call to mind? And what are you thankful for? So why don't you just maybe pause this video And just take a moment to do that. Okay, this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Tell stories to one another about what Jesus has done. Help one another call things to mind and stir up hope within one another. As we remember what Jesus has already done, so we can be confident in our present time, he will also do wonderful and great things. So Joshua is instructed to build a stone memorial, to be a witness to those around and for the generations to come. And so that was kind of then. We live now. I was thinking, well, what are the stone memorials of our day? We don't carry God around in a kind of box anymore. God lives within us. We have access to him. We can close to him. So what do the memorials look like in our day? What are the stone memorials in our time? Well, it says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5, as you come to him, Jesus, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You also, like living stones. We, you and I, are living stones. We are living testimonies in our day and for the generations to come. We're living stones who testify to the faithfulness, the love, the power, the grace and the mercy of Jesus. You and I, we're living stones. We're living testimonies that people can point to and go, they've got a story. They're a living testimony. Hear what God's done in their lives. And then maybe our children's children, the generations to come, they tell the stories of what happened in their family at different times. We're the living testimonies. Joshua set up stones so that people could remember every time they walk past. We're the living stones that get to testify to the world around us. And so what are our testimonies? What are our stories? What will we say about the God who has come to live within us? Like I said at the beginning, there's no such thing as a testimony that is too small. If you've been told that, or if you believe that, that's a lie. I want us to be a people who share testimonies, who tell the stories of God to others. Whether that's be on Sundays, when we meet together, whether that's during our week, in our day-to-day, in our interactions at work, or the places where we do life with different people. We can do it in different ways. We can tell our stories. We can video our testimonies. We can write our testimonies down and give them to people. We can put our testimonies on social media and use the social media for good. Maybe you're creative. You can draw pictures or paint pictures of your testimonies, or write songs about your testimonies. It can be all sorts of ways. We're called to that. We're called to be living testimonies with all of our creativity. Let's be a people who tell our stories of who God is. Tell our stories of what he has done, of what he is doing, and also of what then we expect him to do. One of the things that testimonies does is it stirs expectation as we look ahead to the future. It helps us look ahead with faith, with expectation. It helps us call to mind and think, I have hope for the future because I can testify to what Jesus has done. We're going to go on that journey between now and Easter. It's going to ask the Holy Spirit to help us get better at telling our stories. And as we do that, we know faith will be stirred and people will be blessed. And maybe even people will meet Jesus. That's one of our aims, isn't it? As we tell our stories. Let me tell you what Jesus has done for me, that he could do for you too. We tell our stories. People meet Jesus for themselves. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. Let me just pray first before we finish. Lord, I do pray that you just would help us actually be thankful for all that you've done and that you're doing. that you would help us remember the things that you've done and to share them, and not to kind of embellish them, but just to say the things that you've done honestly and clearly and what it's meant for us. Lord, help us where we have excuses not to tell things. Help us where we've believed that the things in our lives are too little and don't count. Lord, break that lie, I pray. You are a God who has done many things, big and small, in people's lives. And Lord, we want to testify to how wonderful and how awesome and how great you are. A God of wonderful love, tremendous mercy and awesome power. And so, Lord, I do pray, Lord, help us to be that people who go, this I call to mind. Let me tell you about what my God has done. And therefore we have hope. And so, Lord, help us with that, I pray. And bless us in the weeks ahead up to Easter. Amen. Okay, amen. I'll see you next time.